Hello students, let's code some control structures for this video. So first thing I'm going to do, we're going to cover the last part of chapter 5, which covers loops. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new project because I actually work with another application called the future value form. So let's go to Windows form, type in future value. I'll just leave this in my Visual Studio projects for now, and everything else looks fine. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and I should have a new Windows form application that we can work with. I'm going to go ahead and change this form name to future value. And I'll go ahead and rename the rest of the references in my project. I'm just going to go ahead and build the project. That way I can make sure the rename worked. Okay, and it succeeded. So since I changed the name of the form, I'm going to go ahead and change the text property of the form as well to future value. That way the name here matches the name up here, so it makes a little bit more sense. The future value application has, I'm going to go ahead and drag some labels on there. Okay, from there each label, we'll call this label a monthly investment. This label is yearly interest rate. Number of years. Then we're going to have a result label or our future value. So from there, let's try to find text boxes. Text box. Alright, let's try to line stuff up a little bit here. Text box. Let's go and make these a little bit bigger. And maybe not. Let's maybe make the screen smaller. Looks like in the PowerPoint presentation everything's brought in a lot. Alright, and then maybe let's make this smaller. That's looking a little better. Never been a UI expert. Okay. Let's put in a few buttons. Okay, we're going to call this button the calculate button. So I'm going to start it with an and. We're going to call this the name BTN calculate. And this button will be our exit button. So we'll give this a name of BTN exit and a text property of exit. Let's go back to the form level and set, see if I can make this properties window any bigger. Okay, so go back to the form and we're going to set the accept buttons on the form. So the accept button will be the calculate button, and the cancel button will be the exit button, just to make the form a little bit easier to use. Alright, so that's our future value application. So let's start coding some loops with this thing now. So what we're going to want to do, let's go ahead and set this enabled property to false, because that's going to be our results. We don't want to be able to have the user type in there. Okay, let's go to the exit button and just close the code the close event. So that's finished. And then go back here and let's start coding this calculate event. I'm going to Shift Alt Enter to make this full screen. Okay, so what do we want to do? So the first thing we need to do is grab all of the values from the text boxes. And we're going to need to convert those values from the strings that they are, since they're just text boxes. We want to convert those values from strings to something we can work with. So depending on what it is, whether it's the monthly investment, so that'll probably be a decimal of some sort. The yearly interest rate will be a decimal again, and the number of years we'll probably use as an integer or something. So 2 decimals and an integer. So I'm going to go ahead and use the var keyword. So the var keyword in C# allows, it's pretty much telling the compiler, I know what I'm doing, so just figure out the type that I'm giving you. And it makes it a little bit easier to code. You don't have to figure out exactly what your type is ahead of time. You can just kind of get there as you get there. So I'm going to say that I believe it was monthly interest rate. I want to say that's equal to convert to decimal. So I'm going to need to convert what I get from this text box. TXT, I didn't call it. Oh, I didn't give them names yet, did I? Getting ahead of myself. Let's go back and give these text boxes names instead of just text box 1. So let's call this TXT monthly investment. Let's call this TXT yearly interest rate. Call this TXT number of years. I'm just going to call this TXT result. Okay, so then back at our future value, we should be able to get these text properties now. There we go. So now we have our monthly investment. So how much are we going to be putting into our save retirement plan every month? That's not what I wanted, is it? TXT. This is yearly interest rate. Am I confused here? Why do I call it monthly interest rate? Monthly investment, yearly interest rate. So this needs to be yearly interest rate. Okay. Sorry about that. So monthly investment, let's go ahead and convert to another decimal. My monthly investment text property. And lastly, we need our number of years. Let's convert that to an integer, and I'm just going to make it an int32. Number of years. Okay, so now we should have all of that information. So let's go ahead and calculate the future value. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a decimal future value and set that equal to 0. If I can type. And now I'm going to calculate the future value. And to calculate a future value, what we need to do is we need to take the value plus your payment every month. And we're going to multiply that by 1 times the interest rate, or 1 plus the monthly interest rate. So we need to figure out what the interest rate is, and we have it yearly. And we need to figure out what that is monthly, because our interest is going to compound every single month. So our monthly interest rate will need to be the yearly interest rate divided by 12. And we're going to go ahead and do that in our first loop. So we're going to do it in a while loop, a do while loop, and a for loop. So a while loop, this should be a review from Java. A while loop goes through it, continues to loop while a condition is true. So it's important that a condition is changing while you go through it, or you're going to have some sort of infinite loop. So for example, we're going to have an iterator that changes as we go through the loop, and I'm going to call that iterator I. So what do I mean by change? That I is going to need to be incremented number of years divided by 12. Let's just make that a variable. And let's use the number of months here. So now we have the number of months and our monthly interest rate so it can compound. So we have our iterator I that's going to be equal to 1. So this will be month 1, the first time we get our interest compounded. And we want to go through this loop while our iterator is less than the number of months that our investment's going to, that we're going to want to calculate the future value of. So we already have our future value set up here. So let's go ahead and use that variable, and let's set it equal to the future value, because that's going to be changing every time, plus our monthly payment. So monthly investment, and to that we're going to be multiplying that by 1 plus our monthly interest rate. So for the first month, the future value is going to be equal to the future value, which currently is 0, plus our monthly investment of, say, $1,000, times 1 plus the monthly interest rate, so say 1.05 or something. And then when you get to here, we're going to want to iterate to the next month. So we're going to add 1, so now the I is 2, and it's still less than the number of months, so the number of months could be, and this needs to be multiplied by 12. So if there's 10 years times 12 months, that'd be 120 months. So now you're on month 2. And when you're on month 2, this will have a value that is more than 0, plus your monthly investment times the interest rate again, and we'll continue to do that while I is less than or equal to the number of months. So now that we have our future value, let's go ahead and put that in our results text box. txt result dot text equals our future value dot toString, and let's go ahead and format that as currency. Let's see what that does. So let's say we're going to put in $1,000 every month into our retirement. Our yearly interest rate, or our return on our retirement, is say 10%. So let's put in 0.1. And the number of years we'll be doing this is for 5 years. So we'll be putting in $1,200 every year with a 1% interest for 5 years. Oh, we got an exception. Unable to cast. Uh-oh, I don't think I got the .text property. So that's a good point. Let's try that again. I'll show you exactly what happened there. Is it too late to set a breakpoint? No. Okay. So I'm going to calculate. Let's see if I can make this full screen. Alright, here we go. So I didn't pick the text property of here, so what it's trying to do is it's trying to convert what this is to a decimal, but it's not the text property, it's the entire text box, the whole text box object itself, so that's why it's confused. So if I F10 over this, it's trying to cast object of type text box to some type of conversion, and it says it can't do that. So let's get out of full screen and fix that. So this needs to be the .text property, as well as this, and this, and is that it? Am I setting? I am setting the .text here. Okay, so let's try that again. A monthly investment of $1,000. 10% interest for 5 years. Let's get rid of my breakpoint and continue. We will have made $78,000 at 10% interest over 5 years. So let's go ahead and exit out of that and do a do while loop. So that's our while loop. I'll go ahead and comment this out. So a do while is essentially the same thing as a while loop, but it's going to at least happen one time. So we still have our iterator. Let me comment out the iterator, or comment it back in, and say do. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this from up here. That way I don't have to type it out again. And then the do while loop wants to know how long am I going to be doing this. And again, it's going to be the same thing while the iterator is less than or equal to the number of months. So not much has changed. The only difference between a while loop and a do while loop is the do while loop will always happen at least one time. It'll do this one time and then decide whether or not it needs to do it again. So let's make sure we get the same result. Monthly investment 1,000, yearly interest rate 0.1 for 5 years. The same $78,082. So let's go ahead and make this full screen. That way it's easier to see. So the only difference, this while is still down here. But the do, you're always going to go through one time. So do while loops are a lot of times used for like console programs and checking for input from the user. And it's going to do it at least one time, maybe until the user presses escape or something like that. So that's what do while loops are used for a lot of times. But it's always going to check for this condition, so it's always good to have something changing and checking for it to see if it's the value that you've been looking for yet. Lastly is a for loop. And a for loop is used if you know how many iterations you want to go through. So for example, I know how many iterations I want to go through because I know how many months that I want to go through it. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in for, and I'm going to let the IDE do some work for me and just hit tab a couple times, and it'll go ahead and make my loop for me. It doesn't like my iterator here because I already have an I up here, so I'm going to go ahead and comment out my do loop. Comment out my I. Okay. And the length is going to be my number of months. So it's kind of the same thing. I have an iterator that's going to start at 0. I'm going to say while I is less than my number of months. I'm going to say less than my number of months. I start at 0, so that should be fine. And then every time you go through the loop, I want you to add 1 to it. So again, I don't need this anymore, but I'm going to go ahead and copy my future value formula. And ensure that I get the same result. $1,000.1 5 years, and again there's my 78,082. Let's make it full screen. Comment out my for loop since that's kind of been my pattern here. And those are our 3 most common loops. We have our while loop, our do while loop, and our for loop. There is one last type of loop, and it's a for each loop. So if you look under this for, there's also a for each. So if we click on that and hit tab, it'll build out this for each for us. And this is kind of the most used loop much anymore because this is used for collections. So let's say I have a list. Let's make a list of text box. It could be a list of anything. Let's just do a list of integers. So this is the syntax for a list in C#. I'll go ahead and make this a var. So I can add numbers to my list. I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now I have a list of 7 numbers. And I can say for each item for each integer. It doesn't like integer because that's a reserved word. For each item in my integers, I want to add them together. So let's make a total. And I'm going to say total plus equals item. So my total is 0. It's going to say for each item in my integers, add that to my total. So it's going to take in 1, add it to your total, so this will be 1. It's going to take in 2, make my total 3, take in 3, make my total 6, take in 4, make my total 10, etc., etc. So for each loops are really good to loop over information quickly. You don't have to build out this, you don't have to try to figure out while and do while in your iterator. It does that all for you. So all you have to type in is for each and tab a couple times and then just put your collection here. It's really neat, and it saves you a lot of time just to use a for each loop if you have a collection of items. We'll speak more about collections if this list syntax is not familiar to you. Collections are week, I believe, 6? Nope, week 5. So we'll talk more about collections in Module 5. So I hope this clears anything, any misunderstandings you might have had about loops, and hopefully that all makes sense. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.